ocean with strength and in power, determined to care for earth and sea.
Aloha and welcome to Hawaii's Conservation Kuleana, brought to you by the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources. I'm Dan Dennison.
And I'm Patty Jetty. We're here to explore conservation issues from land to sea with expert insights and stories from the field. Today in studio, we have Land Division Acting Administrator Ian Hirokawa. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Ian, tell us about your background, your ohana, and your early life.
Born and raised on Oahu. Pretty much lived in my whole life except for when I went to grad school. So went to high school, then went to UH undergrad, got a degree in history. So, coming out of undergrad, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. So the next choice was, well, you go to grad school. So ended up going to law school at the University of Iowa. Before anyone asks, I'll just say because they gave me a really good, it's a good school and they gave me a really good financial aid deal. So that's why I went. Everybody asked me why I went there. So that's the answer. When I was there, I was like, well, I don't really want to be an attorney. So I had to figure out what I wanted to do and, kind of did different things for a little bit and then ended up at DLNR. When I first came here, I started at the, as a project development specialist in Land Division, but with the Legacy Land Conservation Program and have kind of stayed ever since.
Tell us a little bit about how your background, your early days growing up here has influenced your sense of kuleana for public service and for working with Land Division.
I think, in some ways I felt lucky. I think as a lot of people my age are, we're not young, but having grown up in the 70s and 80s and coming of age in that time period, I think many of us look back on it fondly, but you also, and you kind of look at things today and you realize, well, there's been a lot of change, both good and some of it not so good. So I think it's important, especially when it comes to the environment, what we know now versus what we thought back then. I think it's plays a much critical role in today's life than it did back then. Not to say nobody cared. It's just I think we have a heightened, even higher awareness of these issues. So, I think it's critical that, we all want to try to make sure that things are better, or at least try to make them better for the future. And that's why I think, the department's mission is very critical for the future of the state and the people.
So when we think of the Land Division, you all tend to fly a bit under the radar in terms of what the public knows about you. We hear about forestry, we hear about state parks, we hear about aquatic resources, we hear about doe care. But Land Division has vast responsibilities, and I think maybe the way to help people understand is to start and explain what unencumbered land means, and then from there talk about all the assets that are under management of the Land Division.
Sure. So unencumbered lands is, think of all the lands, owned by the state, and the Land Division is responsible for assisting the land board to manage lands that are not otherwise used for other purposes. So lands used for things like roads, schools, airports, harbors, hospitals, other government facilities. We have no role in that. That being said, there's a lot of what we'll call maybe lands that are left over that, that parks or forest reserves, those aren't included. But there's a lot of lands that are maybe what we would call left over. And that's what we manage. So it's a very diverse portfolio, I guess you could say. You could have certain lands in the urban core, some agricultural lands, lands that aren't really usable for anything, like cliff sides or not necessarily when I say usable in an economic sense, right? I mean, you can't necessarily repurpose them or develop them. The shoreline, that's another, the submerged lands up from the shoreline to 3 miles out. And that's a lot of, that's basically what we have to manage. So it's a very diverse type of land portfolio. So a lot of it is managing. When we say manage, it means that sort of processing requests for use of those lands. So in cases where it's appropriate, let's say we have a commercial industrial parcel in the urban core, we would seek to lease that out, and gain revenue from it. So include things for like for the shoreline, for example, there's a seawall that's seaward of the shoreline, they need to come, it's encroaching on state land, so they need to seek a disposition from us, an easement. So that's like the kind of dispositions we handle. And also, I should have also included state-owned waters. So, waters that are located on state-owned lands. So water licenses, that's another resource we manage. But in the end of the day, when we process these dispositions, we have to make sure that, one, they're compatible with, the public trust, right? That these dispositions are consistent with the public trust. And also, what we do is the income that are from the leases and these dispositions support the rest, our not only our operations, but other department operations. So OCCL, some forestry positions in seaworm. Sorry, I should have said Commission on Water Resource Management, Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands.
And the communications office.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, chairperson. Yeah, we do. So we support additional programs, not just land division, also other, and also I should say, I think the dam safety program in engineering is also funded by us. So the land fund revenues. So, really what it is, it's a means to support other department programs that are critical, to the department's mission. We do have some maybe larger scale development projects in the planning stages, and because people always say, well, you're DLNR, why are you developing? But I think the answer that's the answer why, because we need to do what we can to develop what I'll call stable long-term revenue streams, income streams for the department in the long term, because DLNR gets something like maybe less than 2% of the state's entire operating budget, and when you think about general fund revenues, an even smaller share, because, a lot of our revenues are self-generated. So even though we have maybe 1.5 or 1.7%, when you think about general fund revenues that are sort of the, like the GE tax and whatnot, we get even less of a share. So it's critical that DLNR do what it can to be self-sufficient. So certain projects we have in development are the Pulehunui, this is in central Maui, the light industrial and business park, and we have a transit-oriented development project out in East Kapolei, which is it would be a mix of mixed use, including rental housing, because that's a critical need as well. So mixed use, commercial, retail, office, rental housing, and light industrial. So that's the two sort of major projects we have working on right now.
And just a follow-up, I think people really aren't aware, and I think of Sand Island, where I worked for a number of years. Land Division manages a lot of the land in that industrial complex. But overall, any idea how much revenue you generate per year that goes into that land development special fund to serve the purposes of DLNR that aren't covered in the general fund?
I know, and this is an old number, but I'm pretty sure it's at least 20 million. If not, it's probably more now, but I'm thinking of it, this is probably years old number, but it's at least 20 million.
So without that revenue, there's a lot of projects, a lot of initiatives that probably would not happen here, correct?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Tell us some of the important and continuing issues that the division is facing right now.
Just from a project standpoint, we are working on the upcoming military leases, the dispositions. So that's a big challenge, I think. Right now, we're in the process of reviewing a lot of the environmental studies. So, everyone probably knows the EIS for Pahakuloa, and as of this recording, the EIS for the Army Oahu training lands will be heard tomorrow. So that as of today's recording, we also have additional leases that are coming down the pipeline, the Pacific Missile Range facility and other facilities. So that, it's a project for us. It is a challenge because there's a lot of I'll say very different viewpoints on these, right? So there's, but we have to what I feel is we just have to be true and consistent with the law. That'll get you to the result. You just kind of follow the law and the public trust, and that'll lead you to the result. Ongoing would be like East Maui Water. I know the water authority from the county is trying to take an active role, but ultimately the land board will have to decide, how to allocate the water out there. And that's something regardless what the county, what they have planned or it will have to be brought before the land board, and we'll probably be the ones bringing that to them. How to deal with the shoreline, working with Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands, shoreline encroachment, sea level rise, so those are, I would say, the big issues. There's a lot of smaller issues. Another one is homeless on unencumbered lands, dealing with that, that's a constant challenge too, right? I mean, with sort of trying to keep up with that. So I would say those are kind of maybe the big ones. I mean, we have tons of little ones, but these are like the big ones.
All of those you mentioned are tend to be highly politically charged, very contentious. As you said, many different viewpoints. Is it uncomfortable for you and your staff to be kind of thrust into the political arena on these issues, or how do you manage that?
For me, and what I try to do is have a good command of the facts. That's one, and an understanding of the law, and let that guide your decision, because you're not going to get 100% agreement on any, no matter how well thought out conclusion you come to, right? And you present that to the land board for action. No one's going to agree with it 100%. So as long as you are secure and comfortable in what you've recommended, that is, that follows that, I think that's the best you can do. And it's the most defensible, and at the end of the day, we don't, history will decide, right, on a lot of these things if the decision was correct or not, or the ultimate, outcome was correct. Not correct, but I'm trying to say is how the value of the outcome. But I think that's the best you can do, and let that be your guide.
And then one of the things I wanted to just sort of make a distinction with here were some terms we're bandying about, which is you are with the land division, but the land board is the Board of Land and Natural Resources, which is the decision-making entity here associated with DLNR.
Correct, yeah. Sorry that's correct, yes.
So tell me, Ian, what are some of the challenges and, on the flip side, invigorating aspects of what you do leading the division?
I guess I would say it's never boring. And a lot of times it's not easy. And that's, I would say, both the challenge and the benefit, because it's constantly keeping you, thinking and trying to, what kind of solutions can we come up with, So I think that's the answer for both questions.
How many times have you served as the acting administrator now? Is this the first or several times, right?
No, this is, I think this is the first, but of any kind of what I'll call substantive period. Before it was like maybe a few days here or something, no more than a week. But yeah, this is the first substantive time, yes.
So what does that role entail? And when you're not doing that, what other roles do you or have you taken on?
Well, okay, so I guess the role as an administrator, you just kind of make sure the division is running. We like everybody, I think not just in DLNR, but everywhere we're short staffed. So trying to move things, move work out and get things done as best we can. It is slow sometimes, and sometimes it has to be slow because you do have to put, a lot of thought and consideration into these matters. When you have vacancies, it makes it harder, right? But I think our staff is really doing, the best they can under the circumstances, and, just doing, putting in a lot of effort to kind of make sure that the ship keeps sailing, I guess, So I give a lot of credit to our staff. And on in terms of the specific project, so before I was the, acting administrator, I was the my title was special projects coordinator. And I was doing a lot of the projects, like I said earlier, like the water dispositions, the water licenses, the two development projects, we talked about assisting on military leases, so those are the main ones there. But at the end of the day, what I found with my position is, and both as administrator and even at the special projects coordinator to a smaller degree, but it's still there, is that it's kind of anything, whatever needs to be done and whatever the hard stuff is, you kind of have to tackle it. There's really nobody else, so you kind of that's what you got to do.
Having been born and raised here, now you work for the land division, and it's a large, as we saw, sweeping division. Do you see it differently when you're driving around, than when you were, a kid or younger person?
Yes. Yeah. No, definitely. It's funny, how you realize how complex everything is, versus even before I worked here as an adult, I wouldn't, definitely from when I was a kid, but even as an adult, before you realize all the nuances and just driving down the street. That's why I always say that I can never vacation here anymore, because you always think about stuff. I have to go somewhere else because I don't think about, other issues. If I were to go to a hotel on Kauai, for example, on the beach, you think about all these things. So you never quite get, so yeah, I see what you're saying, and I agree with your that statement wholeheartedly.
So we all know people form opinions, both positive and negative, about agencies like the DLNR. What do you think you and your staff in the land division are doing to engender a positive flavor into what you do day in and day out?
I think, we just have to try to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe like empathy, for people's issues, even if you don't agree with their perspective, you have to at least try to understand it, whether you agree with it or not, why they're coming from their decision. And, they might have good reasons for it. They may not be reasons we would agree with or would be consistent with the law even, but we have to at least understand that. So, it doesn't become personal, right? You don't want to, it's always hard if, you let it become personal. So my view is you always try to be as objective as possible, right? They're advocating for their interests. And if we happen to be on the opposite side of things, we advocate for what we think needs to be done pursuant to the law. And ultimately, a lot of the things is it's up to the land. We don't make those decisions, right? It's up to the land board, and the land board will make it. And yeah, whether we agree with it or not, that's just the decision. That's the role, right? We're not they are, and we just have to, accept it. We may not agree with it. We have to accept it. So in that mindset, just carry yourself in a professional manner. When we do sort of make a recommendation to the land board or take a position, it's important to really provide a thorough explanation, because, there's a lot of nuances that people, maybe not be aware of, right? There's a lot of nuances that we factor in, and maybe they're aware of, maybe they're not, but I think we should put it out there. So people at least understand why they may not agree, but at least they understand why we came to the conclusion we did and recommending what we did, whatever we do to the land board. So I think that's important. And like I said, maybe they agree, maybe they don't, but at least it's out there. And, sometimes they don't even acknowledge it, but, I think that's what we need to do, at least because in the future, that goes into the record, right? And in the future, at least people will be aware of what was done if there was any question. So,
with your background, you have that law background, you could really work anywhere. You'd have a lot of options. Why did you choose to stay with DLNR?
Yeah, you could work in Iowa.
Well, we don't need to answer that question.
To answer that question, I mean, I didn't want to be an attorney, and that was so. And I think I just didn't know, and I kind of rode with the flow, in terms of trying different things. And I'll tell you this kind of story. It's kind of personal, but how timing works sometimes, right? And I was at a point where when this opportunity to work at DLNR came forward, I was contemplating, okay, do I sell everything I own? Because I had friends that are, live and work in LA, and they work in, the quote unquote industry. So I was thinking, do I want to take a chance and try and move up there and try and be a writer? And how timing works out sometimes. The opportunity to work here kind of came around at roughly the same time, and I thought, well, let's just. This sounds interesting. I've never really gotten involved, with this kind of environmental work, and I wanted to see what it was like. And I said, I'll take it and give it at least a couple of years, and see what happens. And the rest is history, right? I've kind of stayed since. And
how many years now?
18, yeah. Right. So at DLNR. So, that's how it kind of worked out. But I think it's just, I'm very lucky to work with a lot of good people, both within Land Division and within the department as a whole. I've been very lucky to have that. Secondly, like I said, the work it's important and it's interesting, and I think those are the two, and the third thing I guess I would say is when it comes to a job, there's that classic, I guess, the Venn diagram, and it's like, what are the three of like something you enjoy, something you're good at, and something that someone's willing to pay you for, right? And you got to find that where they all meet. And I guess, at least for me so far, it's been in that middle, so I guess that's how I would, I guess that's my reasons, I guess, so I'll admit, it wasn't like I ever grew up dreaming of working here. I didn't know, it's not like, like some people, they're multi-generational DLNR employees, right? Their parents work, right? And they work. So that wasn't me, but it was just something that kind of happened, and it stuck. So
Final question, I'll put you on the spot. Any chance we'll see Ian as the permanent administrator?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just trying to get through my days with all the emails and questions and everything else. That's something for the future, but yeah, we'll see. And really, honestly, that's not my call, right? I mean, it's so I don't want to make it sound like, that's really not my call, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Great. Well, thank you, Ian. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you for your time, and mahalo to our listeners for joining us today. For now, I'm Dan Dennison.
And I'm Patty Jetty.
Our theme music is provided by Kavika Kahiapo.
Thanks for tuning in to Hawaii Conservation Kuleana. Ahui ho.
Me ka aina o me ke kai.